Not here to make you happy, not here to make you sad. Your feelings are irrelevant when debates are to be had. The Belfast Bapcast, loud and clear, covering the topics of the sphere, Working overtime to bring you many stories, waking up today the same Labour and Tories. The stage it is and our part to play is bringing you knowledge in this way. No filter, no fuss, just tell unfiltered fact, much like the words on those Christian tracks.
Good evening, and today on the Belfast Bapcast, I am joined by a woman who shook the foundations of American intelligence from the inside out, Coleen Rowley. Coleen served over 24 years as a special agent with the FBI, rising to become the Chief Division Counsel for the Minneapolis Field Office. But she's best known for something far braver, and that's breaking rank in the aftermath of 9/11. While the rest of the world was being told a tightly controlled narrative, Coleen wrote her now famous memo to FBI Director Robert Mueller, exposing how internal failures, ignored warnings, and bureaucratic politics crippled the Bureau's ability to prevent the attacks. The act of conscience made her one of Time Magazine's Persons of the Year in 2002, alongside whistleblowers Sharon Watkins and Cynthia Cooper, women who refused to be silent in the face of institutional rot. Since then, Coleen's been a relentless advocate for truth, transparency, and accountability within US intelligence, speaking out on everything from the war on terror, mass surveillance, and CIA overreach to the moral decay of America's security state. So tonight we go beyond the headlines. We look at the machine from the inside, the cover-ups, the silencing, the manipulation of fear, and ask the questions, has the FBI become the very threat it was designed to protect from us? So thank you very much for joining us this evening, Coleen.
Yes, thanks for having me all the way in Ireland. My goodness.
Absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure. So obviously it's quite a while since you whistle blew, or whatever the term would be, but still every bit as significant today as it was back then. So the question is obviously going to focus around that subject. So before the whistleblowing and before 9/11, what originally drew you in to the FBI, and what did you believe the Bureau stood for back then?
Well, like most other FBI agent recruits, we kind of fall for the myth that you see on television of good guys versus bad guys. There were television shows, even in the 50s, that, there was a hero that was an FBI agent. And I'm not the only one. A lot of people think that TV is real. So I joined, and of course, I was motivated on the side of justice. When you see these shows about saving children and kidnapped children and horrible murdering crimes, organized crime, that type of thing, you want to be on the right side of it. I was always kind of a Dudley Do-Right, I think. So I joined the FBI, and I worked in 3 or 4 different offices. The majority of my time before I was transferred to Minnesota, I worked in New York City on the mafia. So for close to 7 years, I sat with earphones on, transcribing really vulgar language for court. And they eventually all got prosecuted. The different heads of the 4 mafia families got prosecuted. Then each family got prosecuted, the hierarchy. And it took a while. I think overall, it took maybe 10, 12 years for the FBI to bring down the organized crime in New York. It didn't necessarily save the day. Things happened afterwards, new crime families, etc. Jump into the vacuum. But then I got transferred to Minnesota. And when I got transferred here, the position was for the legal counsel of the office. So I had to study up. I had been out of law school for how long? Well over 10 years. I had not really, followed up on practicing law. I had gone to law school, but I hadn't practiced law. So when I got this position, I had to teach FBI agents constitutional restrictions on search and seizure, interrogation, right to attorney, even First Amendment a little bit, right to First Amendment. So I had to study up a little bit when I first got here. And I did that for about 12, 13 years until, and actually along the way, the myth of why, thinking, oh, we're all the good guys and we're fighting crime, criminals, and the bad guys. That starts to fall away at a certain point because, some of my colleagues did wrong things. Some of my bosses did really wrong things. And, I started to kind of complain about some things that I was already seeing before 9/11.
Was that always the case? Was that always the culture within the FBI, or did you notice a shift in culture? Or
you know what it is? It's not. It's what the police, they call it the blue line or something. They call it
blue line,
the code of when you're in a group and you all think you're so good. Then if something bad happens, nobody's going to speak up. And the police are really that way because they depend on each other. If they're going into a dangerous situation, they all depend on each other. And even if someone does mess up, you're rarely going to have someone in the group tell the truth about it. If you remember, there was a movie, and this is based on a true story. What was his name? He was in New York City. I even met him once, but he was a police officer in New York City. And eventually he saw corruption amongst the ranks. You probably don't know the name, huh? I'm trying to remember. Oh, sorry. It's an Italian guy. Well, anyways, it wasn't made into a movie. But that's the type of thing that happens. And so people, in order for any entity's culture to be fixed and to be learn from mistakes, you have to understand the truth about it. That's the problem. So you can get long-term problems that get worse. And one of those problems in the FBI that I started to see because I was working organized crime in New York City. So the FBI was operating the top echelon. It was actually called the top echelon of organized crime. And one of the notorious cases that eventually came to light was Whitey Bulger in Boston. And he, ironically, he was the head of the Irish mafia in Boston. But the FBI, because they were operating him for 20 years or more, a long time. And no one ever said you can't do that. You shouldn't be operating this top boss of an organized crime outfit.
A lot of very gray areas in the FBI's, counterterrorism activities when they're, almost starting these fringe groups, and when it goes from infiltration to actually birthing them and setting people up and putting situations where patsies can get involved. That's guilt.
Yeah,
that's creating a situation as entrapment.
Absolutely. It's a slippery slope because you get credit for getting information from an informant or a source who is a bad guy. Okay, all right, maybe that's a line. That's fine. You're getting information. But what happens is that the relationship gets more symbiotic after a while. And in the FBI, there were at least two well-known cases, one of which is Whitey Bulger, where the FBI is operating murderers. So, that just completely is upside down from the reason that you join the FBI. You join because you're the good guys. You're going to solve murders and stop crime. And now you find out that the FBI is actually behind some of the crimes. So this happened like in the late 90s. Whitey Bulger case came to light because of a curious judge. Otherwise, no one would have ever learned about it. But a judge pried into the informant file and found out. I'm just going to digress for a second because this relates to Robert Mueller, who later became the FBI director. When Whitey Bulger that file was uncovered by a judge, and then they started to look into, oh my gosh, the FBI's operating a top murderer in Boston for 20 years. Look at these agents. They even prosecuted the agents that were operating. But when that happened, guess who was the acting U.S. attorney in Boston? Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller was the acting U.S. attorney, and there's some evidence, indication that he helped cover up the fact that Bulger's murders were pinned on for other innocent people. And of course, they were low-level mafia guys, but there were 4 lower-level mobsters that went to prison for murders they had not committed, that Whitey Bulger had committed, but they were covering for Whitey Bulger. Later on, these 4, 2 of them or 3 of them died in prison. Their families got $100 million in a settlement from the FBI. And Robert Mueller was the head of the U.S. Attorney's Office, who allegedly knew about this. So
and
there you
obviously
go.
He gets rewarded for his complicity, doesn't he?
Well, his complicity is water under the dam now, because it looks like, I think he's gotten a form of senile dementia. I think he's too old. He doesn't quite, it happens. It's a very large percentage of elderly people they kind of lose their minds a little bit. So at this point, but he was well in control of his faculties during the relevant time periods when he helped cover up things, including 9/11.
When did you notice a dramatic shift? When was it just uncomfortable for you, the stuff that you were starting to see?
Well, really right from the start, because, so after 9/11, and you can't blame Robert Mueller for the fact that he ignored the warning signs, definitely throughout the summer, but even in the months leading up to 9/11. So in the months leading up to 9/11, there was so much so-called intelligence coming in that the director of the CIA and the FBI and the counterterrorism czar in the White House, they said their hair was on fire. I mean, this is actually in the 9/11 Commission report, that the director's hair was on fire. Why? Because so much information was coming in indicating that about these attacks by Al-Qaeda. And there had been prior attacks by Al-Qaeda in Africa. The African embassies had been bombed. Now we even think, although that was covered up, but there was a big bombing in Saudi Arabia. It was called Khobar Towers in the years before. But now it's believed that was actually Al-Qaeda that did that, because they were trying to push the United States out of Saudi Arabia. And that killed, I think, 19 American servicemen. So there was all this information about an attack. And yet, and Robert Mueller is only director for 1 week before 9/11. He can't be blamed for not doing anything because he was only director for 1 week. But what he can be blamed for is after 9/11, then he did his level best to cover it up. He went out in front of the cameras and he said, the FBI had no information about anything. Otherwise, maybe we could have prevented 9/11. And so after he said this once, people tried to correct him, because we said, you're going to look awful when they find out all this information afterwards. And when you say these things, if we had just had information, we could have prevented 9/11. There was a lot of things, that the FBI knew. And Robert Mueller was told very quickly. He was told about the Phoenix memo. He was told that the 2 hijackers had been in California. He was told about the Moussaoui case. And he just chose to continue on with, they'll never find out. Our office in Minnesota And it wasn't even, it was not me personally, but our entire office, including other supervisors and the special agent in charge, had decided that because there was this large, huge attempt to cover up the Musawi case in Minnesota, that every single time we had an outgoing communication, and in the weeks after 9/11, the communications throughout the FBI, they were, leads all over, look this up, look up this, people were practically in a panic. And so there was all kinds of things going on. But the office had decided that every time they sent a response back on a lead, that they would put the background of the Musawi case at the beginning of it. So it's if, for instance, someone had said, we have a suspicious vehicle in Atlanta, but the plate comes back to Minnesota. Can you please tell us who owned this license plate in Minnesota? Okay. So what our office would do when we sent back the license plate, we'd say, oh, but let us tell you about the Musawi investigation. And then there would be these pages of the background. And, the FBI from August, our agents, 2 agents had followed up, and an INS agent, 3 of them total. An INS agent, they were all on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. They got a call from 2 whistleblowers at the Egan Flight School. And these whistleblowers were flight instructors. They never would call the FBI for no reason, because their company training people to fly would be mad at them. They wouldn't allow them to call up the FBI about a customer, about a paying customer. And they got into trouble. So they would get into trouble by doing this. And when they called the FBI and said, we have the most suspicious flight student that anyone has ever seen here. And these 2 flight instructors called separately. They didn't even know the other one was calling. And they called to 2 separate places. Then our agents followed up right away. And they said, yeah, it's unbelievable suspicious. And I even got a call the very night that they had followed up on this case. They had tried to interview Musawi. They had spotted suspicious things amongst his personal belongings. And they called up and said, it could be, actually the acting supervisor said this could be related to Al Qaeda. This is August 16, 2001. And a little bit later, when our headquarters was not allowing any further investigation through the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to get a warrant to search, etc., when they refused that, our acting supervisor, the same one who called me up the night they took Musawi into custody, he said to headquarters, don't you know this is a guy who could fly into the World Trade Center? He said it this was August 28th, I think. So this is after they're frustrated and the headquarters will not allow them to investigate. And then he's arguing with them and he says, don't you know this is a guy who could fly into the World Trade Center? Now, of course, Robert Mueller says, oh, there's no way anyone would have known this. And after 9/11, when you see 3,000 people die and you see this kind of a circling the wagons and cover up, at that time, of course, in September of 2001, I had no idea that there was a bigger agenda to start launching war on Iraq and all of this project for the new American century, that if we get our new Pearl Harbor, we're going to take advantage of it and start war to gain full spectrum dominance over the world. I mean, these plans existed, but I was completely unaware of that.
I don't think people understand that there is very good people operating within these very dark systems. Not everybody's compromised, and most people are, quite a few like yourself were trying to do good. And whenever you did notice something that was beyond even anything that you could comprehend, you whistle blew. And what was that moment like for you? Like what?
Well, the office, again, there were 2 or 3 agents, investigative agents, that were very directly involved, and they were called back to headquarters a month afterwards for a meeting. The meeting was, this is our story and we're sticking to it, get in line. And from headquarters top down, they produced a so-called timeline. And they were trying to explain, because everyone was saying, how could this have happened? Where was the FBI? Where was the CIA? How could this have happened? No one knew the in and outs of how the CIA had not told the FBI. No one knew any of this. But there was pressure from politicians, trying to figure out what had happened. And the FBI, in a defensive move, was trying to say, well, this is what, our story, our timeline. Well, of course, it wasn't accurate. They put in things into the timeline that justified the story, and they left out other things. So we all pretty much were on the side of truth at that point. You can't see 3,000 people die and then think you can still kind of fudge the story, and so that you would come out looking okay. I mean, to me, that's wrong. So there was no investigation initially, and Dick Cheney apparently threatened the senators that they were not allowed to call for an investigation of 9/11. People have forgotten that. But this is when anthrax happened too. And there were, I think it was Daschle, I can't remember who they were, but some of the senators were calling for an investigation, and Dick Cheney was telling them, no way. That's just going to make us look weak if we air the dirty laundry. So he had told them no. But by early 2002, I want to say February or March of 2002, the senators had finally been able to get up Joint Intelligence Committee inquiry. And so a joint intelligence means it was House and Senate, and they had some leaders of this committee, and they went to the 3 main agencies, the NSA, the CIA, and the FBI. And I finally found out I was going to be talking to these staffers from this committee. They hired all former, because you have to have a top security clearance. So they hired people who were retired FBI, retired Secret Service, retired CIA. And the FBI, there were like maybe 5 of these people that came, and they interviewed a lot of people to try again to come up with what happened here. What happened? Well, I learned about this in May, that I was going to have to go. In fact, I only had about 5 days notice. And when I found out that I was going to get a chance to tell the staffers of the Joint Intelligence Committee, I really couldn't. There's a couple of nights I could barely sleep. I was just going over in my head, well, I got to tell them this, I got to tell them that. And then I said, you know what, 3 a.m., I'm going to get up and make a list just of all the points that they should know about. And I got up and I went to the office about 4 a.m. in the morning, and I started making just an outline of what I needed to tell them verbally. But I started to write it down. And then when I started to write it down in more of a memo form, I said to myself, the boss of the staffers was a retired FBI legal counsel, like a GS-15 legal counsel. And he himself had been accused of covering up a prior inquiry of the FBI on Waco. I think it was called the Danforth inquiry, or it was on Ruby Ridge or Waco, but it was one of the two. And there had been a prior Senate investigation of the FBI for one of these real serious, problems. It was either Waco, or I think it was Waco. And this same guy who was heading up the staffers had been accused of covering up. And so then I said, well, you know what? I'm going to put it in writing. That way, if I forget anything when I'm talking to them, I'll just give them the memo. So
Yeah.
when I went there, and they probably talked to me for at least a couple 2.5 hours, and then they said at the end, is there anything that we have left out? Is there anything else you want to tell us? And I said, well, just in case I have forgotten something, I did write this all in a memo. And I handed it to these staffers. Again, all have top secret clearances. And then I also copied the FBI Director Mueller. I copied our FBI's internal affairs, because I had heard that our internal affairs had not investigated any of this either, even though they'd been told Phoenix memo. It was a lot more than the Minnesota. There were other things too. And they had just like, oh no, we don't want to go there. Let's leave that alone. So I took it to internal affairs. And then I went down outside the FBI headquarters, and I caught a cab, and I went directly to the Senate Hart building. And I had put 2 of the senators on that committee, one of whom she's now deceased, Dianne Feinstein, and the other one was Shelby. And I didn't know these senators from Adam. The only reason I put their 2 names on these sealed envelopes with my memo was because I had seen their names in the paper. They were, when this committee was going on, there were newspaper articles about how they were asking questions, and Feinstein and Shelby had asked questions, so I had seen their names. And and one was Republican and one was Democrat. And when I got to the Senate Hart building, you could not get in because of the anthrax scare. Even like 9 months later, they had a big lines. You had to go through security. So I went up to a security guard and showed him my badge. And I said, I've got to drop these off at Feinstein's and Shelby's office. He actually kind of escorted me to their office. And then I dropped these envelopes off. And thinking, I was scared. I knew that I was going against what the FBI did not want to tell this truth at the moment. They did not want this to come out. And I knew I was a little scared. I was very scared about it, but I still felt like, okay, I have done, that's the only thing I can do here is a little bit of truth I know about. And at least I've done something. The next day or a day later, maybe it was 2 days, but I want to say it was even just 1 day later, our office gets called by CNN, the news organization, saying, we have just heard there's a leaker in your office. And I went, oh my gosh, this has turned into a big thing. And then the other thing was maybe 3 or 4 days later, after this kind of broke in the news, I got called by somebody on the staff of the bodyguards. The FBI has a security staff that guard the attorney general, and they guard the FBI director. So that's an internal thing that the bodyguards they're FBI agents, but they become the security for the FBI director and the attorney general. And I got a call from somebody that overheard they were talking about firing me for now think about this, for having told the truth to our own congressional committee that all has top secret clearances. Can you imagine this? That's how bad this is.
Imagine.
What?
I said imagine.
Yeah, imagine. I was surprised. I didn't know. Now I do. Now nothing surprises me. I have seen this for 24 years of all of the things that have happened, even after 9/11, and nothing surprises me now. But at the time, that actually did surprise me. They also tried to classify my memo afterwards so that the media couldn't publish it by blacking out like 2 or 3 words. And the words that they blacked out in my memo, I was a legal counsel, and I knew I wasn't supposed to say the names of a foreign intelligence agency. A French foreign intelligence agency is classified. You can't say the name. You can't, if you leak out the name of it, that's classified info. So instead of saying the name of the French intelligence agency in my memo, I had just written a French intelligence agency. I didn't say anything, the name of it. And they blacked out French intelligence in order to keep it from going public.
Ridiculous. So obviously that's going to leave a lot of disillusionment with government and the institution that you joined in general. And I'm imagining that started another journey for you of discovering what was really going on behind the veil.
Well, and it wasn't too long thereafter. I mean, this all happened in May and June. And then the Senate Judiciary had me testify, and I wrote my own little, what do you call it? That's that first opening statement or something. I wrote my own statement to the Senate Judiciary because they were trying to say, well, how can the FBI be fixed so this won't happen again? And yes, it's true. Robert Mueller was not wrong. He was right that the computer system in the FBI was part of the problem. He was not wrong about that. And so I also chimed in with him and said, yes, we have the worst computers. You can't search things. It wasn't even like Google. So before 9/11, you couldn't even do a search of other cases, like a Google search. It didn't exist in the FBI. It was almost impossible to do. And that's why the different offices, Minnesota, Phoenix, California, New York City was the big one. They couldn't hardly share information because our system did not allow the sharing of information. So it was a big problem. And I testified about that and other things to the Senate Judiciary. And then after I think not very long, I mean, actually, right then, right when I was testifying to the Senate Judiciary, a person from the Inspector General's office of the Department of Justice came up to me and said, Coleen, we're starting an investigation. We know, your actions are going to force us to open an investigation. And that DOJ Inspector General investigation lasted for about 2 years, almost 2 years. And it's about 500 pages long, and it has about the Phoenix memo, the Moussaoui case, and then something that none of us knew at the time, which was that the CIA had been following Al-Qaeda for nearly 2 years and knew that they had come into California, and that was a whole part of it too. So my efforts did lead to some truth coming out, and I can take some credit for the fact that once you kind of open the door, then yes, now we finally did. We didn't learn everything. There was some of the agents that were assigned to the CIA, even when they did the Inspector General investigation, they were still under the impression they had to lie. And now they've told the truth. They've come out. There's been a documentary made of these agents that were assigned to the CIA. They knew that there were Al-Qaeda that had come into California. They tried to warn the FBI. They were told no, they couldn't. The CIA told them no. And then they were even told they couldn't tell the truth a year later to the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. So think about it. We had FBI agents, and these were good FBI agents, and that's why they were selected to be a part of the CIA's counterterrorism thing. And they even lied a year plus after 9/11 because they thought they had to. They thought they were supposed to. Again, when you're in these groups, you don't know what's right and wrong anymore.
Yeah, institutionally, the strangest thing for me about 9/11 was the fact that there was a mock simulation going on of the exact same scenario happening on that day, and that's what confused NORAD. It always seems that whenever there's a great world event, they seem to be simulating it at the same time or not long before. Or
it could be a couple reasons. One, when Condi Rice says no one ever would have thought planes would fly into buildings, and she says it in such an innocent way, and she's a beautiful Black woman in $1,000 suits, and people don't question that. That's no. Condi Rice was involved in planning for different meetings in Italy in that exact same scenario of a plane flying into a building. I mean, this was known. And so part of it is people in the intelligence, if they are already conversant with something that could happen, they think they have to keep it from the public. The other thing was, if a plane, not just flying into a tower, but what if a plane flies into a nuclear plant? And if they fly into the wrong place of a nuclear plant, that is unbelievable terrorism in terms of how many people it takes out. Well, the agencies knew that this could happen. They knew about it. I think there were even plans, different Al-Qaeda manuals that they found, etc. That's one reason for a so-called cover-up. They think that the public is not mature enough to know about threats. And so only we can know those things. And then what happens if you fail? If you're the only one, well, then you say, oh, we didn't know. The other thing that's going on with Al-Qaeda, but also with other groups, is it's back to what I said about Whitey Bulger, operating a top echelon of the bad guys. So, and this has always been accepted. It's an accepted thing that you could reach up to the top of an organized crime group and operate that boss of the organized crime group. Well, guess what? In Afghanistan, the FBI operated Al-Qaeda as part of the Mujahideen fighting Russia. They operated the Chechen leader. The Chechen leader his name was Abu Khattab. And one of the memos that had been written, I didn't know that any of this until much later. It came out at the prosecution of Moussaoui. A document came out in discovery, and the document was from April of 2001, 5 or 6 months. Oh, well, it would have been 7 months before 9/11. And the memo was entitled, Bin Laden and Abu Khattab are entwined in going to, I'm paraphrasing the title, but it was that they were entwined and working together, and they were going to attack. This was in April of 2001. And so, but guess what? Abu Khattab and Bin Laden had been the United States proxy forces. So when it's organized crime, we call them top echelon informants. But when it's in the world and you're operating the head of a violent group or a neo-Nazi group, they're called proxy forces. But they had been our allies, and we had armed Bin Laden. We had armed him with Stinger missiles, and I think I think that's one of the reasons why they were covering up, and they didn't quite realize how Bin Laden had turned against the United States. The first times they should have realized this were the bombings of the embassies in Africa, and then the bombing of the coal in, was it in Yemen or whatever? I forget where it was, but the bombing killed people, the bombing of the coal, and then the bombing in Saudi Arabia, which to this day has never been recognized as having been accomplished by Al-Qaeda. Louis Freeh, the former director of the FBI, blamed the Khobar bombing. And again, that would have been during the time that they still considered Bin Laden as an ally. So they still considered Wahhabis, whatever, the extremist, as an ally, because he was the one that we had armed in Afghanistan. And there's a lot of indication that it was actually Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda that bombed the Khobar towers in Saudi Arabia years before 9/11. But they were slow to come to this realization, both with the Chechen bosses and Al-Qaeda. Why? Because they had been, just like Whitey Bulger, they had been the people we had been operating. It's very similar. And that's, people come up with more complicated explanations. But when you look at foreign policy, and when you're using bad guys around the world for your foreign policy proxies, it's going to be inherent. It's inherent
Yeah.
that there's blowback like this. And it goes with the territory. If you think you can arm and fund extremist forces throughout the world, there's going to be some bad consequences on you yourself. And so much of this is just the inability to realize that we can't be doing this. And I would say even now with Israel, it's even the same thing. It's going to have some bad consequences even on the United States.
But who manages who there? Who's the bigger power? It certainly looks like Donald is submissive to Benjamin in that setup. Like whenever you're listening to it on the news, they get on like Donald's playing some sort of 4D chess, but he's just submissive.
He took $100 million from Miriam Adelson and other.
Shelton,
that was just one. I mean, he took a ton. He took millions of dollars, and that was in order to do. And he's admitted it. He just admitted it. He said, "Well, look over there," and she's smiling, and he says, "Look, Miriam Adelson. She had $60 million, you don't. That's why I changed the capital to Jerusalem." He actually is admitting that this money and this power of the Israel lobby has, completely captured him. He said it out loud.
He doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't do anything to hide it. And I think it's sort of 50% what you said. Like there is a level of incompetence and covering that incompetence up. Where you're managing foreign assets and there's a blowback from it. But I think there's also a level of allowing things to happen and maneuvering certain scenarios so things happen for political outcomes or for, political outcomes would be for litigation, for different types of legislation to be introduced, like the Patriot Act, for example, just seemed to be sitting ready in the wings to be introduced. I think it's a very dark world that these people operate in, and there's just agreements being made here and there, and handshakes that the public will never see or know about, and it never changes whether you're Republican, Democrat, or centrist, or doesn't matter who you put your hope in, and unless it's hope and above, you're going to be disappointed.
That's exactly right. It's basically a truism. It's an axiom, and it was phrased this way by Rahm Emanuel at one time. Don't ever let a catastrophe go to waste. Yeah, don't ever let a catastrophe go to waste. I mean, other people might say, "Oh, we can make lemonade out of lemons." Okay, so something bad happens. Okay, don't worry about it. Don't worry about anything something.
The term is the Hegelian dialectic. So where they create the problem and they offer the solution to manage the outcome is the technical term of it. It's and it's so obvious, but I think we want to lie to ourselves as well and not believe that these institutions are so corrupt and that somebody or people can be so evil. But unfortunately, we are living in a world of good and evil, and we were told our battle is not against man, it's principalities. It is against good and evil, and it's so apparent now more than ever, even more than 9/11, that the world has just been taken over by a force that's not off this world.
Yeah, it's it does remind me a little bit of the World War II situation. I've read books about how people got so brainwashed. In fact, there were people that they didn't. I forget Raymond Pretzel. It's a book. I forget the name of it now, but he had a pseudonym, and they didn't publish the book until after he was dead. He was able to escape Nazi Germany, but he was a young man. He was against Hitler, but he was trying to become a lawyer. And they forced him to go to these camps. They forced him to say Heil Hitler, go in the marches. I think he's even had a Jewish girlfriend at one point. He was out shocked and outraged when these first things happened. By the end of the book, he's explaining this is how it works. And it's very similar to Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. So when you're saying evil, the worst thing about evil is it's banal. That means that people are easily manipulated. And especially if you own the airwaves, and especially easily manipulated when you are shocked. They call it shock and awe. So when people are turned to jelly from their own fear, something bad happens, they know, okay, that's the new Pearl Harbor. That's the new Pearl Harbor. Look.
Psychologically, you're in a heightened state of awareness, and you're looking to anywhere for safety, and that's always authority. And that's why I believe most of these situations happen. And call me conspiracy theorist or whatever you want. It's been proven most times to be right, and COVID was another perfect example of the madness. They run event 201 a year before it, of that exact situation happening, of a coronavirus type pandemic taking place in the world, and then all of a sudden they have these vaccines ready to roll out, and it's always problem, reaction, solution, and it's always going towards the same one world agenda.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. They know that they get people in a heightened state of vulnerability after they've been hurt. And especially when you can show them pictures, or like Pearl Harbor is a great example. I mean, we don't have to have hypotheticals here. When Pearl Harbor happens, the whole country turns, and people want a simple solution. That's the other thing. They don't want anything complicated. They don't want to know, oh, well, yeah, you did this to Japan, and then Japan did that, blah, blah, blah. They don't want that. They want evil. They want, we hate this group. We have to fight them. We'll have to demonize them, etc. That's what, unfortunately, it's part of the human condition that the people who have, if you read the book, there's a book. It's written by I think it's Cambridge or Oxford. It's called The Wisdom of Psychopaths. And it's maybe 10 years old now, that book, but it's an excellent book because there's an endemic situation of people who are able to lead, in other words, persuade through different ways, influence, coerce large masses of people. And they tend to rise up in business. It's as CEOs. It's in every single sector. But you will always have the people who are the leaders. And the leaders they tend not to fall for their own propaganda. They're more immune to it. But normal people, there's a social psychology experiments. There are the Esch group, the groupie stuff. The Esch where they pick a line, and if you're in the group, everybody picks the same line. And then the Milgram where you give a high electric voltage shock to somebody if the leader tells you to. And then the other one is Zimbardo. And this was called the Zimbardo prison experiment. You're just telling
where they had jailers and they had the prison guards. That was insane. Right. So within 24 hours, it had descended into complete tyranny.
When you give power to a group, even in a classroom, their own friends, they're friends with each other. But if you tell one segment of the classroom, oh, you're in power, you're the jailers, and you're superior, and these are the prisoners, they're criminals. They had to stop those experiments because friends were starting to torture their own friends. That's how powerful this is.
Well, that would suggest that there's something beyond the physical, and they know how to manipulate that, and they know how to manipulate that upon mass. And there's, very few watchmen or watchwomen out there who are unaffected by it and who are able to see, and they're the lonely voices in the wilderness, sort of shouting out, no, this is this. But uh, it's kind of inevitable. I think humanity is flawed and is inherently evil.
Yeah,
Um,
we talk about people being critical thinkers, but there's very few people that are, and actually some of these leaders are critical thinkers, but they just are so motivated for their own money and power and their own sense of, I don't even know what you want to call it. It's not like they're serial killers, but they get a certain amount of derive their life,
meaning, yeah.
enjoyment from manipulating and controlling large groups of people. And critical thinkers, if you're not in the group that wants this unbridled ambition to be the top dog in control, and yet you can still see when groups of people are being manipulated. So in my case, not only all this 9/11, but then all of the wars, I've been outspoken about they were all going to backfire. I wrote a memo already after I was on Time Cover that said, this is going to backfire. Iraq war is going to backfire. You know what? The people in the FBI hated me more for that because they all had war fever. So when Bush said, okay, now we're going to go to war on Iraq, that Iraq is behind 9/11. I said, the FBI knew Iraq wasn't behind 9/11, and yet they all got war fever. And I spoke out saying, no, this is going to turn out badly. It's not a good idea. And I was hated. I was lucky to make it to retirement at that point because I was hated in the office for going against the war. And it's how simple it was to manipulate even people. Bush and Cheney got 70% of the United States to believe that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11, when in fact they already knew it was bin Laden and they were actually enemies with each other.
Also,
I mean, it's incredible.
The fact that Saddam Hussein, love him or hate him, he was a stabilizing factor in that region. And they done that intentionally. It's all part of the Greater Israel Plan, and they pre-named the countries they were going to go into, and the only one left is Iran, really. So,
and then you can, when you mentioned jumping all the way to COVID, right at the very start of the COVID, and I was like, it didn't make much sense to me. But then I had a 16-year-old niece who worked in a nursing home, and this was before the so-called vaccine came out. And my 16-year-old niece, along with the nursing home, one of them was over 100, and they all got it in the nursing home. She got it. She didn't even know she had it. She had no symptoms. She's 16. She got COVID. And this was the first one, the one that was more virulent or whatever, before it had transferred to basically a common cold. But the first one was worse. She got it at 16. My uncle in the nursing home got it. He was 70s or maybe closer to 80, and he survived. Then 2 months later, they came out with the vaccine. They gave it to the nursing home people after they had natural immunity, and my uncle died. My uncle died after he got the shot. And so this was right in 2000, I think, or 2020. And I went, I don't think I'm going to get that shot. It doesn't seem to make any sense at all to me, So all of the people that were on the more or less liberal side, the progressives and whatever, they all went out and just got shot after shot. They're up to 10 shots now.
A personal question: do you have faith, or where do you stand in that sort of region? Like, do you believe in God, or what's kept you resolute throughout?
I'm a hopeful agnostic. Someone said, "Oh, you're an atheist." I go, "No, I'm not an atheist." But
you want to be proven wrong.
Yeah, I'm ecumenical too, and I believe that there are elements of good theology in most all religions, including the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. We reap what we sow. I mean, I think there are some very basic theological things that apply in most all religions. And I think, okay, those are good. Those are good. On the other hand, if a religion tells you something like you can't, in the Bible, somewhere in the Old Testament, it says you can't wear cotton. I mean, there's some crazy things in there. I mean, obviously,
that one, there is actually scientific backing behind that. So whenever you wear cotton, which is a natural material, your body radiates a higher frequency as opposed to polyester. When it says you don't mix two threads, so it's you don't mix. I think it was cotton and something else, but it's basically when you mix these two threads, it actually does block your body's ability to receive frequency and radiate frequency, so it leaves you electromagnetically dead. So there is actually, as mad as some of these things sound in the Bible and Leviticus, etc., there is actually, yeah.
And the eating pork made sense because of trichinosis. Yeah. So I
plus pigs don't sweat and they retain all the toxins. So I mean that can't be great for us. You know what I mean? Yeah, like as you say, there's things to be gained and garnered from all these religious texts, but I think it's clear that, especially the time we're living in now, that everything seems to be speeding up and everything seems to be very right on the edge of war at any moment. You know, you've got Israel and Palestine, you have Israel and Iran, you have, you know, Sudan, you have all these different sort of areas of tension that just feel that any one of them ignite is just going to sort of start world.
In the United States, we have Venezuela. Trump has bombed 7 boats now. And the last one was a Colombian boat. It wasn't even Venezuelan. They don't know who he's bombing. And they're looking like they're planning to not invade, but start a large aerial bombing of Venezuela. That looks like that's what they're talking about. So, yeah, it's just here in Minnesota, I'll just mention the good news. There are people, I mean, it's not like the whole state, but today there's a sit-in of some activists at the, our state has $5.6 billion invested in Israel. And it's invested in Israel's arms and different settler colonial companies. So it's 5.6 billion. And there's been a group that has been trying to get Minnesota to divest its pension funds from Israel, just the same as they did from South Africa. So back in the 1980s,
Apartheid,
they were successful. Finally successful in getting divestment from South Africa. So they haven't been successful. They've tried now for at least maybe, I think it's almost 10 years to get this. It's called the Board of Investment in Israel. And today,
it seems a lot more people are waking up to the role of Israel on the larger stage, but I have a question who's behind them as well. They're not the final boss, I don't think.
Well, it's definitely symbiotic with other powerful forces. But today there's a sit-in, and I don't know, they'll probably forcibly send in police to remove them or something. But I mean, it's something. And like in our case, we have a group of 9 or 10 plaintiffs in Minnesota who have sued our congresspersons and senators for voting to arm Israel. They voted $26.6 billion in 2024. And they knew it was already determined it was plausible genocide. So, and you know what? Our laws are not supposed to allow that. We have the Genocide Convention implementation law. There is an actual law on the books in the United States that you cannot, and you know what? It's the death penalty. So if a guy from Rwanda or Serbia or somewhere was to come into the United States, or even from old World War II, they can give them the death penalty for being involved in genocide. And yet our Congress just voted to send 26 billion to Israel when Israel was engaged in a genocide. So we sued and we wrote up our own complaint where we could not get an attorney. Even attorneys are scared of challenging because a judge can call it frivolous, and then they can be disbarred and they can lose their career. So we can't.
Well, they also could be Charlie Kirk,
Charlie Kirk, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things going on. And there's a bad side to it, of course, very bad side, murdering Charlie Kirk, etc. But the good side is that people are just starting to finally wake up. And I would say Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and we have these very popular commentators, and they're on the right side. But you don't have to agree with them, but I will tell you what, there's nobody that understands better if a foreign country is controlling the United States. How can you say make America great, America first, when Netanyahu comes over and controls our entire Congress, 58 rounds of applause, etc. And even Trump says, I'm doing everything for Israel. Okay. If you're America first,
well,
that kind
don't
of
be shocked that politicians
way.
are hoodwinking you. Let's not be shocked that politicians are charlatans. That by their very nature, that is what they're deceivers. They're actors on a world stage. Is all they really are. I mean, their controlling interests are never seen and never held to account, and it's very frustrating. And it is good to see that people are starting to wake up, that there's more going on, but it's too much too late. Really, a nation has nearly been wiped off the map, and that's went on for years. It's not just since October 7th, and it's okay. People being out banging. It's trendy to be pro-Palestine, and people don't actually, I believe, feel the feelings, or on the whole, I think it's just more to look cool. Being pro-Palestine, it's where's the action?
It's a mixture, I think.
No, there's definitely genuine. Yeah, 100%. There's people that are genuine in all our avenues of life, but in the time and the era that we are living in, it's very self-absorbed, and it's all about how you're perceived online and all the rest. So it's cool to have a Palestine flag. It's cool and all the rest, but the reality is, there is a systematic, a systematic wiping out of a race going on, and it's being allowed, and it's not only being allowed, it's being supported by most Western governments. And we have on the face value of it certain world leaders turning their back on Netanyahu and the European Union. But the reality of it is they've supported him for years, and it's now no longer trendy to support him on the world stage. So now they're no longer supporting him. It's too little too late. And people will be held to account for this, whether it's on this earth or the next. You know what I mean? It's pretty evil stuff that's went on. You've tried to expose the evil that you came across, and more credit to you. And I believe that if you came across it again, you would do the same thing all over again.
Yeah, I was lucky too. I mean, I have colleagues that ended up in prison, like John Kiriakou and others. There are a lot of people that have to suffer a lot more than me. I was able to reach retirement, and it's a minor miracle, but I reached retirement, so I was able to get a pension. Most of the other whistleblowers that I'm aware of not only did not get to retirement, but they were actually imprisoned or prosecuted for telling the truth. And the drone whistleblower Daniel Hale did, I think, 4 years for telling the truth about drone bombing, that they were killing people and saying that they were killing terrorists and they were just killing civilians. And yeah,
And a
it's
system is polluted. You're most likely always going to face repercussions for trying to do good in a system so not good, if you want to put it as mildly as possible. I mean, it's a corrupted system from the top down. It's run by lobbyists, spiritual interests, other interests that we don't see and can't see and never will see. And obviously it's going to happen if somebody tries to step outside that and do the right thing. There's supposed to be protection for whistleblowers, but I mean, as you say, you're very lucky. That's not really a thing. You just happen to be public enough, I think, that if they had have done anything to you, it probably would have emphasized what you were saying and brought more attention to it.
When I was giving talks on ethics, I got asked this a lot, and I said, at some point you have to, if it's important, if it's life and death matter, I don't think that you can live with yourself. And what people do is they do try to rationalize why they've done something wrong. I mean, your brain can play tricks on you because of ego defense, etc. But I think that at some point, when it's important, when it's very important, I don't think you can be complicit because you feel guilty afterwards. And that'll haunt you the rest of your life that you could have done. Remember that book by Camus called The Fall? I think it's called The Fall. And it's about somebody who regrets he had a chance to jump into the Seine and save a drowning woman. And the water was too cold and I can't swim very well, making up excuses why he didn't do the right thing. And that kind of thing is, I think, what you're left with at the end is doing the right thing. And it doesn't always work out well. You end up, like Mandela and like Julian Assange and, in prison for a long time. You didn't do anything wrong. But I still think that to live with yourself, you have to, there are moments when you have to really figure this out. And yes, going against the crowd and the group and the leader, and if you're not full of yourself, this hubris that comes from being told you're superior, that's one of the main banalities of evil. The Aryan supremacy, telling them that they were supreme, Aryan supremacy. That's why they did bad things, because we're supreme. Israel telling them they're chosen people, chosen. When you are so full of yourself that you think that you're superior, and if you can do all those things, you know what? You're not going to lead a blameless life. You're going to make mistakes, etc. But at least you're going to be trying a lot harder than the average people who are so easily manipulated. And I think that's
a very, very good note to actually leave it on. We're all faced with these moments in life. It may not be as large scale as what you came across, but we're all faced with these dilemmas in life where we have the choice to do right or we have the choice to do wrong. And we do try and justify the wrong choices to ourselves, and no amount of justification will ever make it right with you or your soul. So I would say the best bit of advice is when you're conflicted and when your gut's telling you to do something and when it's quite rightly and clearly the right thing to do, just get it done. And if the consequences are loss of platform or loss of reputation or loss of whatever, so be it. You've done the right thing, and you'll go to sleep at night knowing that you're on the right side of history or the right side. Just try to be more reticent of your decisions. It's, as you say, you can try and justify it any way you want, but you had the choice to do right, and you didn't. How do you reconcile that?
That's right.
You can't, and it tears into your soul, and it leaves a mark, and it'll never be reconciled. And you thankfully don't have that to deal with, and you've continued on with activism, and more power to you. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Belfast Bapcast this evening, and thank you very much for giving us your time.
Yes, and keep up the good work.
Yes, I intend to. If everybody could just like, share, and subscribe. And Colleen, thank you so much. And you keep up your good work and never let anybody silence that voice.
Yep. Thank you again. And yeah, we'll cross our finger. I'm crossing everything here.
Yeah, you're going to need to cross everything. And as far as the world stage is concerned, I think so. We can only look after our own immediate circle and hope for the best. So,
Yep.
Good luck and God bless.
Yep. You too.
All the best. Bye bye.
Yeah. Not here to make you happy, not here to make you sad. Your feelings are irrelevant when debates are to be had. The Belfast Bapcast, loud and clear, covering the topics of the sphere, Working overtime to bring you many stories, waking up today the same labor and Tories. A stage, it isn't our part to play, is bringing you knowledge in this way. No filter, no fuss, just tell unfiltered fact, much like the words on those Christian tracks.